the Embrow Grazing Partnership. This event is being recorded and will be posted online. Since 2020, the CCWCD and the Land Connection, U of I Extension, Terra Alosa LLC, Illinois Soybean Association, and the Pasture Project have partnered to provide education and resources to increase regenerative grazing practices in and near the Embrow River watershed. We've hosted field days, online training sessions, and online informal discussions with grazers, farmers, landowners, educators, and stakeholders about the benefits of regenerative grazing. And we look forward to hosting more events and sharing resources. You can find the page about the EGP and our events and resources on the Champaign County Soil and Water Conservation District's website, which we will drop in the chat. We're happy to have you here today. My name is Nicole Haverback with the University of Illinois Extension, and I will be facilitating today's session. I'd like to thank the members of the Embrow Grazing Partnership for helping organize this series. Mallory Krieger of Terra Alosa, Jennifer Jones of Illinois Soybean Association, Aaron Gundy, Morgan Cobble, Ivan Dozier of Champaign County Soil and Water Conservation, Jesse Schaefer of the Land Connection, Katie Bell of University of Illinois Extension, and Kelsey Virgin of the Pasture Project. This series is funded in part by North Central SARE's Professional Development Program. So today is part 5, where we are focusing on a live producer scenario, and we are joined today by Brett Matthews of Dividing Ridge Farm to discuss troubleshooting on their grazing operation. So Brett will first share his knowledge and experiences associated with grazing and raising diverse species and run through our topic scenario troubleshooting presentation, followed by a moderated question and answer session. As we progress through today's talk, you can either drop your questions in the chat and we'll get them answered that way, or you can raise your hand or ask your questions verbally as well. Today's a little bit of a different format, so that might be the easiest way to do so, but whatever you feel the most comfortable with. And with that being said, I will turn things over to Brett to introduce himself and get things started.
All right, thank you very much, Nicole. Let me get my screen shared here. Here we are. Okay, so as she said, my name is Brett Matthews. I'm a regenerative farmer, rancher, mostly ranch now, in West Central Illinois, Adams County, just about 15 miles east of Quincy. I retired from the Army 5 years ago after 20 years and moved back to our family farm. Those are my great-grandparents at the top right. And that house behind them was built in 1924. But the farm's been in the family since, I believe, 1868. And so that's what we're working with. We got manage about 200 acres. And our operation, we do regenerative grazing. We have our own flock of sheep, about 50 breeding ewes, and we do custom grazing cattle during the main grazing months of like roughly April through November. We produce grass-fed and or pastured meats, pork, chicken, eggs, lamb, and the occasional beef. And then we're also in the future planning to incorporate some restoration agricultural projects like swales, nut trees, and perennial crops, things like that. All right, so one thing before I move on is last year we encountered some extremely dry periods, which kind of hurt us. We had planned 2 years ago, we'd had 25 cow-calf pairs added into our system, and they did great. We were able to run those cow-calf pairs on about 1 acre for 25 pairs per day, and things went really well. I think that was kind of in a perfect world scenario, and we were hoping things would improve a lot more. But then last year in 2022, we had added some more grazing ground through cover crops and that kind of thing. So we actually doubled the amount of cow calf pairs we had in 2023, but things turned dry basically right after June 1st. We did put in a cover crop mix on about 63 acres. And we did get about 2 grazing passes off of that. And we didn't get any cows until the end of May, and they actually had to go, we had to feed them hay there towards the end just to get them by until the owner could come get them, which was on October 11th. And the previous year we'd gotten them, in 2021, we'd gotten cattle in the end of April and had them until mid-November. And so just because things turned dry, so we didn't have the regrowth that we had, and we actually, I'm somewhat ashamed and yet have to admit that we did end up overgrazing some areas quite a bit, and we're still paying the price of that because the sheep that we own and that we keep, we've had to end up feeding them hay for much of the winter. And so just to talk about the weather patterns, I mean, they talk about climate change and stuff like that. I mean, we're getting about the same amount of average rainfall every year. It just seems like that the precipitation events and even sometimes the temperature fluctuations are way more extreme and a lot more unpredictable. I mean, we see like the winters have been fairly mild, the summers have been relatively mild, but it's like, we'll get a cold snap in the middle of winter, like this winter was December, and it's just things aren't going, the way that they have historically. And so like right here on the left is the drought map from the University of Nebraska out of Lincoln on September 6th. And the star on the left star there, that's where we're located. And you see that we were in the moderate drought period in September. And then on the right, that was actually February 2nd. So we were still pretty dry through much of the winter. And you can see I kind of did my best to superimpose the Embarrass River watershed onto that map. It's kind of weird looking, but it just kind of shows that a lot of the people and ranchers and farmers in the Embarrass River watershed experience dry as well. And so basically the overarching conversation I wanted to have today was about drought and how to manage, maybe building some resilience and having a plan in case things did turn dry. Because it's not really with drought, it's not a matter of if there's a drought, it's about when. So we know that we're going to experience at a minimum dry spells that we just need to work through and have a plan based on either the forecast or the current conditions. So like right here, this was March 9th, so just 5 days ago, and you see we've still got some areas. I mean, much of Kansas is in pretty severe drought. I mean, if you actually look in, there's some states that are completely covered with, at a minimum, abnormally dry areas. And so it's really not a far stretch for those dry spells or the droughts to move into our area. It doesn't take much, and it's just something that we need to talk about. All right, let me just get back to a couple slides, and we'll talk about the area that for our audience that most of us are here for. So the Embarrass River watershed, it was just the history. It was named by the French because there was a lot of obstacles and log jams. It was kind of hard to navigate coming through. But it's 195 miles long, and the watershed covers 1.556 million acres. So we've got a pretty good area there. And it's the only population of these harlequin darters, which are, a lot of people see are just minnows, but they're like a maximum of 3 inches long. So it's really important that we protect these waters. as much as we can through our land management. All right, moving forward. All right, so what is a drought? I was looking up, doing some reading, and if you want to talk about drought, the experts, I actually was on Texas A&M's website and was reading about them. A lot of people say, oh, it's a drought because it hasn't rained much. Well, it might be just a drought because things aren't growing the way they're supposed to. You know, you see this picture in the bottom right, is that obviously that's extremely dry when the ground starts cracking like that. And that's something that we experienced on our own property last year. Was, I mean, it didn't look like that obviously, but we did experience some cracking that, I mean, I think a small child could get lost in. But I think the textbook version of a drought is, I think, less than 75% of annual rainfall or precipitation. And hopefully the precipitation isn't measured like this rain gauge here on the top right, which is actually just full of dust. So anyway, so if we experience a drought, what are our options? I mean, there's quite a few here, and I'm going to go ahead and open this up to our participants. What do we do if there's a drought? The top left, there's hay. Can we feed hay? Do we sell cows or livestock? Do we just wait and pray, watch the forecast and hope that that cloud turns into some rain? Or do we move them somewhere else? As in the bottom right, we put wheels under them, as some people say. So I can't see if anybody's talking in this.
Yeah, so to those of us who joined a little bit after we did some of our housekeeping stuff, Brett just kind of gave us a run through about his operation and experiences, and now he's kind of just opening it up to the group. And if you have any comments, you can either drop those in the chat and I will get them relayed, or you can go ahead and turn off your mic and just say them verbally as well. That works also.
So this is Katie. I actually just got off a phone call with a producer that was asking about feeding hay that they maybe wouldn't normally feed. Like they had some questionable hay that they set aside, and they are now, I think because of the shortage of hay, trying to decide whether they can safely feed that or not. And so I guess my question is, like, is that an issue that you run into, and how do you kind of make those decisions, like feeding them forages that you wouldn't normally feed when you're in a tight spot, and kind of how do you navigate or think through that?
Well, I'll just comment on that based on people I've talked to. I haven't fed anything that you'd consider, air quote, questionable. I mean, cows will eat just about anything if you mix it up right. I know that there are people around me that actually, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but they take very poor quality hay and they run it through a grinder and mix it with molasses, and the cows eat it. I don't know if it's good or bad for them. I think it's kind of I don't know if it's a budget thing for them or if it's a just to get them by situation. But I mean, cows, I think, are a lot less susceptible to variations in hay quality than like horses. I know horses, I mean, if they get moldy hay, they're getting sick. Cows, I think they'll just kind of pick through it. If they eat some moldy hay, I don't think it'll mess up their rumen or their physiology as much as it would for others. But yeah, so the cattle producer that I custom graze for, I just texted with him this morning. He's actually feeding corn stalks, and he's mixing it with a wet gluten feed just to get by, because like you said, there is a hay shortage around here, which is surprising because it seemed like every square inch of Adams County here was being baled if it could. I mean, waterways and grassy fields. And I'm honestly surprised that the USDA didn't open up some CRP ground for baling in our main area, but I don't think the drought was as widespread in Illinois enough to justify that. But
this is Trevor Tolan.
yes, sir.
I think the important thing to remember here about feeding cows, whatever, several different things have been mentioned, is that a cow, like a person, can only consume approximately 3% of their body weight per day. So if we're talking about a 1,200 pound cow, it's 36 pounds of dry matter. 1,500 pound cow would be 45 pounds of dry matter. So regardless of what the feed is, that's their consumption. If the nutrient value of those 36 to 45 pounds is not what it should be, then that creates a problem. Perhaps not over a day or two or a few days, but over a longer period of time, there'll be a lack of nutrition. And if the cow's getting ready to calve, that's really significant. Or if she's feeding a calf already, that's even maybe more significant. So I think that's the important thing to remember, is that the protein value of the feed, the nutrient value of the feed needs to be good enough that she has what she needs in that 36 to 45 pound range.
Agreed. Thanks, Trevor. Does anybody else want to add to the conversation? And there are scenarios where, for example, a couple of years ago, Gabe Brown up in North Dakota had experienced such a long-term drought that they actually did have to trim their herd down and sell a bunch of cattle, because I think feeding hay, especially during a drought, is kind of a band-aid for a lot of people. You know, if it's June or July and you're having to feed hay, I don't think that's a long-term solution, because if there's no end in sight for a drought, you're going to have to start making hard decisions. And that's where later on we'll talk about making a plan a little bit. And but yeah, feeding hay throughout the summer for months is just not a good long-term solution, and it's really not economically feasible. So really, you start having to think longer term when it comes to that.
Hey Brett, while we're on the topic of drought, would you mind going back a few slides to those pictures of like the drought maps that you had?
Sure.
I just have a clarifying question.
Okay. Illinois or US?
Illinois, please.
Okay.
So those stars that you have, is
Yep.
the star that's on the left, is that where your farm is located?
Yep, that's where I'm at in southeast Adams County, and then the other star is Champaign.
Okay.
Just for reference.
Awesome. That was just my clarifying question.
Okay. All right, and then, so I've heard some speakers in the past say that in a lot of cases, we create our own droughts. And I'm not going to get into the weeds with that a whole lot, just for the scope of this, but we have things that we can do that actually make us more drought resilient. The slide on the right, top right rather, is, talks about organic matter or carbon. So if we could take steps to increase that in our soils, then it'll increase the water carrying capacity of the soil, and it'll just make us more resilient, or be able to negotiate a dry spell longer. The slide on the left talks about rotational grazing, or as it says there, managed grazing. This is from the Sacred Cow thing. I just borrowed it from them. I don't have any association with them, but yeah, it has a lot of benefits, and not just not just drought resilience. There's a lot of other things that come with rotational grazing like that. The slide on the bottom right talks of, basically it's a graphic for overgrazing, or it basically explains how it's really easy to overgraze, trying to keep those animals from taking that second, third, or more bites. And basically the roots get sloughed off of those plants, and then it just takes them a lot longer to recover, and even more so if there's no moisture. Does anybody want to add on to that?
Well, there's several significant things here on the page that they don't really say. Maybe I'm not reading the fine print, perhaps, but one of the important things in a dry summer is heat, of course. And if the ground is completely covered with forage, the soil there is going to be approximately 20 degrees cooler than bare soil.
Yep.
So that's really significant in the ability of plants to grow and soil to accept moisture and keep it. The other thing is that some people, especially in the early growing season, when you often have a flush of forage and you have more than you want, and cattle are trampling a lot of forage into the ground or down to the ground, that trample is actually good. They often people think they're wasting a lot of forage, but that is actually good because it's adding a lot of organic matter to the soil and helping. The more organic matter also helps to retain moisture that you get, and if you're getting just a small amount of moisture, it's really significant.
Yeah, I agree. There's a rule of thumb that I've been taught is it's like the feed a third, leave a third, trample a third, or something along those lines. But that first graze, what I like to do is actually kind of do a flash graze. So I'll almost give the animals twice or more. There's a it's a little calculator. They call it a calculator. And what it does, basically, you can figure out your paddock sizes and say, okay, I want to move them once per day. I've got this much. How much do I want them to feed them of my available sward? And so, say I want to feed them, say 20%. And that first one, what I like to do is run them through real quick just to kind of keep things from going to seed, like the fescue, the timothy, the brome, the things that seed early, run them through real quick to kind of prune those and keep them from just going to seed early. And then, like Trevor was saying, is get that trample down, get a good layer of organic matter on the surface, or armor, as Gabe Brown calls it. And then you can kind of slow down your graze. If it's a daily move like I do, slow that down later and be more intentional. Go back to that 1/3 rule. Anyone else before we move on? All right. So what does a good drought plan look like? There are so many resources out. There is, this is a slide. The top part is from the USDA northern plains area, in which they experience a lot of, I mean, they're rainfall limited or precipitation limited up there anyway. So it's not a surprise that they ended up going through quite a few droughts. And so I think that they're a lot more prepared and have a lot more resources up here. And this is just a simple example here. It is a little bit on the small side, and I had to stretch it to make it fit. But they talk about mobility, you know, moving animals and just being flexible. So kind of don't put all your eggs in one basket type thing. And then same with they have storage, pooling, market, and you know, it's all there as far as things to consider. There's diversification, things like that. Now, if you're in a drought, don't do like this giraffe down below and just goes through these 5 stages of grief. If you actually have a plan in place, or at least have a good idea of what you could do, resources, maybe a pasture that you would normally bale or something like that, or you know, just at the end of the season, like, all right, well, we didn't graze it, let's go ahead and bale it. But it's good to have something like that kind of set aside just to get through the times. Also have you know, options. The problem that I've heard and seen, that when you're in a drought and you try to thin out your herd or you know, sell some animals, is that animals get cheap in drought, because a lot of people tend to do that. So people, ranchers don't want to sell during a drought because the prices are so nasty. So that's also a consideration. Now, Trevor, do you have a drought plan for your operation?
We're 100% permanent pasture, fescue and Reed's canary grass. So Reed's canary grass, if you know anything about it, grows in almost all conditions. It really likes wet soil. It grows very well when it's cloudy. So we feel like we're kind of drought proof. In 2011-12, when things got really tough, we were green. We were able, we've got about 50 paddocks, so we were able to rest paddocks for 50 days in a lot of cases, and we stayed green and vegetative. We didn't have as much forage as we normally have, but we got through it pretty well. That's our worst experience with the droughts, 11 and 12, although we're really dry right now.
And Trevor, where are you located? You're is it near Macomb?
Yeah, I'm just northeast of Macomb, short distance. We water a lot from ponds, and our ponds are the lowest they've been since we built them.
Huh.
So we need runoff moisture. It's something we haven't had this winter. We've had several rains, some light snow, but none of that has run off.
Right.
Yeah,
I haven't seen a lot of runoff on my place either. There was one rain event a couple weeks ago that was pretty significant. I don't know. We got, I think, a couple inches all at once. And we had a little bit of runoff, but yeah, most of it's soaking in. Anybody else have anything they want to add? Said I'm sharing my screen. I can't see the chat or the.
Yeah, Brett, do you have more slides that you want to share? Or is that the end of your presentation?
I have just, I think, a couple more.
Okay.
Well, there you go. So let's go down the rabbit hole.
Sorry, we just got a comment in the chat that says that they're wet in Southern Illinois. We're wet in Southern Illinois.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a thing with Illinois. If we talk about, talk to an audience of people that are from all over the state, one end could have had, the northern end could have had 2 or 3 feet of snow, a couple weeks ago, or, a bunch of rain down, east of St. Louis, or, in West Central, like around Trevor and I, could be dry. And so it's, we've got a lot of, I don't want to say variations, but it's a lot of inconsistencies throughout the state. So, when we're talking, to just people from Illinois, it's different. And I know that the target audience here was the Imbra River area or watershed. So, but I think we're close. All right. So one thing I wanted to mention before we kind of open things up to like a free for all was that in Proverbs it says that as iron sharpens iron, one person sharpens another. So I think that it's important for us to do workshops and events like the one we're doing now, and share ideas, share knowledge, share experiences. But also understand that, what works for one person may not work for another, but the same type of ingenuity and creativity and following the same principles will help us all be better. All right. Just real quick, here's my contact info if anybody wants to reach out. I'm available for phone calls, text messages, any of the above. My Facebook got hacked last year, so my wife manages the Facebook page. We're still kind of navigating that, but it's still
awesome. Thank you so much, Brett.
All right.
With that being said, we can open it up to some discussions. If anyone in the audience has any comments on Brett's presentation or questions, you can drop those in the chat, or you can raise your hand, unmute yourself, whatever you feel comfortable with.
And if you need me to pull up one of those, my previous slides, I've still got it kind of at the ready. So I'm more than welcome to share my screen back again.
Okay, awesome. Well, one question that we have is, how would you go about switching from a traditional grazing system to a regenerative system?
Well, I never did a traditional, so it's hard for me to say. But I think it just using hot wire. I mean, take what you've got. Don't like, keep it simple. Don't put a lot of money or time into infrastructure of subdividing your land. Just let hot wire, put up hot wire, and don't be married to where it's at. Like, be flexible and just see how things work for you. Because, for example, through the NRCS, I've been working on this prescribed grazing management plan, and they subdivided the property that I'm managing up into, like, I want to say 22 paddocks or something like that. About 6, I want to say like about 6 acres each. And I was kind of blunt with him. I said, "You're crazy if you think that I'm going to put up a bunch of permanent paddocks like this." I said, "It's going to take away all of my flexibility. The gates from one paddock to another, those are going to get trampled down into nothing, running cattle through. Or for one day, if the number of cattle that I have, I need like 1.5 of those 6-acre paddocks for whatever reason. It's just going to be a nightmare." And so I have opted not to do the subdivision of those multiple paddocks as far as not into permanent paddocks like that, putting in posts, permanent posts and all that. So yeah, just use hot wire, get yourself a good portable energizer and just start subdividing out, look up that, I'll try to find it while we're talking, but try to find that calculator. It's an Excel spreadsheet actually. And get that and learn how to observe and see what your sward is looking like how many pounds do you have here per acre, and start breaking it up and then figure out how much they need per day and just go on that way. That's the simplest way to do it, I think, is because yeah, trying to get into the permanent paddocks and everything like that, I think it just becomes overwhelming.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question from the chat is, I may have missed it, but are you grazing sheep and cattle together?
Not together. And here, I would love to do that, but there are a couple hangups. One is the sheep. I found I need for my sheep, and I'd like to get them trained differently, but I need at a minimum of three strand hot wire for the sheep. The cow, I can do a 30-inch hot wire and move them around easy. Single hot wire is easy. Also, since these are custom grazed cattle, the owner has them on a specific mineral program that's not conducive to sheep. And so that's another concern. I haven't figured out how to safely feed cattle a mineral that the sheep can't have or can't have access to. So that's another concern of mine, and why I'm not running them in the same paddock.
Thank you for clarifying. Another question that we have is, it's for Brett and Trevor. Brett and Trevor, are you seeing pastures being converted to cropland in your area?
You go first, Trevor.
It's I don't think it's necessarily happening now because it's already happened with the market prices we've had. Yeah, a lot of pasture land has disappeared.
Yeah, so I thought that we were beyond this years ago, but I'm actually seeing some fields actually moldboard plowed, some pastures, and we're talking some rough ground. I mean, hillsides, and I'm just like putting my palm on my face. I can't believe this is happening. But one guy actually did that last year, of course, planted corn, and then now he's grazing corn stalks with sheep. So it's but yeah, I'm seeing that for sure.
I think maybe the good thing is that there's quite a bit of interest in grazing because the young people that are coming along, maybe in college or just out of college, in order to join the family operation, they need another enterprise. So there's more interest in livestock grazing, livestock feeding in various ways. So I think that's actually, I think we're in a phase right now where we can appeal to those people, and we can see some of that highly erodible or marginal, if you wish, marginal ground go back to grazing. So I'm fairly positive about what can happen in the next 5 or 10 years.
That's great to hear, Trevor. I think that would be a positive step in the right direction for a lot of places, but it's tough.
I think one of the important things for us to do as grazers is to show as specifically as possible how to make money grazing, because I don't think that marginal land will go back to grazing as long as we have the grain prices that we do now, unless we show that grazing on that same ground can be just as profitable and a lot less risk, actually. Your inputs will be quite small, and the outcome is enough that there's pretty good profit in grazing.
Yeah, I agree with that. In our area, one thing that I'm seeing a lot of is that instead of grazing, is that these folks that, I'll just say they're not from around here, but they buy the ground for hunting. And I think that it's a great opportunity if we can educate those remote landowners that grazing would actually, if anything, help, or responsible or correct grazing would actually help the wildlife. You know, I was afraid the first year that we ran cattle through our property that it was going to affect our deer hunting. And if anything, it improved it. I mean, just the deer seemed to flock to our area. But it's also, on the flip side, it's kind of driving land prices, even marginal ground, driving those land prices up a little bit. And so it's making it to where, yeah, these grazers or ranchers, they need to be able to see that they can still make a profit, or just as much of a profit on the grazing than the row crops, because I'm trying to think how to put this, is it's like they have to get the land to pay for itself, because the prices are so high. And I think that a lot of the rent, like the cash rent prices, are driven by the price or the value of the land per acre. And so it's just kind of a sticky situation overall, in my opinion.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. If we don't have any more commentary on that, we'll move into our next questions. Mallory or Katie, I don't know if you want to say your questions yourself. If not, I can certainly relay those, but.
Mallory, you're not unmuted.
Sorry, I just realized I clicked it, but it didn't take. So yeah, I can ask my question. So I've got a farm in Western Illinois, just down the road from where Brett's located. And my ground is pretty variable. I've got a number of ravines that are wooded with steep grades that break up my grazable area. And I'm thinking through particularly a water management system, and I'm looking for some input on how to kind of efficiently and effectively get water to different paddocks when they are broken up by pretty steep, 20-30 foot deep ravines with grades that are difficult to walk. Like, do you just, I'm thinking kind of along the lines of like frost free, because of course I can drag a water cart in other places, but just kind of looking for some insights how to deal with that.
Yeah, we have one of those deep ravines as you've described. It's we were actually going around it, so there's I don't know. I'd love to host people on our place and come take a look, see what we're up against, and also see what we've done. But they do have those directional borers that they could take a water line and dig it, or not dig it, but basically punch it through those areas. So that's an option for you if you can't go around. It's just, if it's just not feasible to go around, to trench around. But you could do that directional boring as well with water line, just like they do with, like they put in a bunch of fiber optic internet line around here. They use those directional borers through some of the rougher terrain.
Thanks, Brett.
But what I'm doing, I'm still dragging a water cart. I haven't got my water lines put in, but the plan is in place.
Obviously, the water situation is the most expensive part of setting up a grazing system. Mallory, I'd really be thinking, without looking at your place, I think I'd be thinking of a temporary system, which would be black plastic pipes laid on the ground. You're down in Pike County, right? So you don't quite as cold as we even do here. And you're probably not going to be grazing in those areas all winter where you have to worry about freezing. So that's just about the cheapest way to go, is to have a black plastic line running on the ground to reach down as far as you need to go. And then maybe someday have something permanent if that works well or that sets up well for you.
Thanks.
All right, I see that Ken asked a question about the budgets, and I don't know specifically about the Imbra grazing project, but I don't have the hard numbers in front of me. I did work out a budget, but there was a specific field that was being row cropped on our place. 7 acres that could be tilled, and it was fairly marginal. But the surrounding areas, like, up to the timbers and everything, it was 11 acres. So I had grass all on the edges, the waterways. And so the 7 acres turned into an 11-acre area when it came to grazing. And so in 2021, I was able to graze 25 cows through that 11 acres 3 times. And I was able to get, I want to say, 8 or 9 days per grazing pass. So let's just say if it was 9 days, that was 27 days of grazing on 11 acres. And if I was getting, and I know it's on the low side, if I was getting $1.25 a day per cow or per head, or per pair rather, let me pull up my calculator. I had 25 times, and I said 27 days. So I was making basically on that 7-acre field, $843.75 for those 27 days. And then, like, in the wintertime, I was able to run the sheep through and stuff like that. So but yeah, Mallory's got a good link up there for you. But I'm just saying, it's not real hard to figure out, your budgets, but you have to take in, one, land cost, all your inputs and everything. And with pasture, I think the biggest thing that you need to figure in, one, is your land cost, and 2 is your labor. Are the 2 biggest things. So trying to cost compare and do all that as far as budgeting, those are considerations.
I've always suggested that producers keep track of their animal units. That's what Brett was just going through there. The number of days grazed by the number of animals, the animal unit being 1,000 pounds. So that at the end of the season, they can actually like a corn or soybean producer could definitely show his profit. The same thing can be done with grazing. And I think it's important that we do that. And that tells us if we need to make improvements on a pasture, or we've got pastures that don't need anything at all. But we want to be able to show either a landowner or other grazers what kind of profit can be made from grazing. And that's the only way to do it. You got to have the statistics. So don't just be guessing at it, keep track all year.
Thank you all. And if nobody saw the link that Mallory dropped in the chat, it's a really good resource. So thank you, Mallory.
If I could, I would love to have Katie's question asked, because I share Katie's question. Do you want to unmute and ask yours, Katie?
Sure. So it's kind of a two-parter. And I don't know if there's a really good answer to it, but so the property that I'm talking about is about 58 acres, and about half of it, or maybe a little under half of it, is old grown up pasture, like crazy grown up, like wooded area, a lot of honey locust trees, wild blackberry, brambles, and probably like multiflora rose and like all kinds of stuff. And the question would be, how do you have any suggestions for reclaiming some of that? Because there is in some places some old perimeter fence there, but I wouldn't trust it. And I don't know, running a temporary line through there might be somewhat difficult. It could be done, but it would be difficult, and I would be a little bit worried about how effective the line would be, because I'd be worried about it getting ground off, like on a tall weed or something. So I guess, and I can clarify more if you have other questions, but that's kind of my question.
Well, I think there's a number of things that you could do. If fencing is an issue, I mean, you could focus on that, the perimeter fence. That way you could have a little bit more peace of mind. But if it's overgrown in the way that you say it is, I think that maybe there needs to be some brush management, maybe some chainsaw work done. And but definitely I'd start out just by mowing it off. And I hate to say that, unless you've got a flock of sheep, or more specifically goats. If you get goats in there, you could do that. But then again, if you don't trust your fence, then I don't think goats would be a good option for you, unless you got that perimeter fence fixed. So there's a lot of things that you could do. And I know that the honey locust, the thorny suckers, they look nasty. They pop tires if not managed properly, but they make pretty darn good shade trees. And I'm having to fight my own internal monologue on those at times, because they are one of the few leguminous trees that we have in the Midwest as well. But they make pretty good shade trees, and the pods are edible for livestock.
Yeah, I know some things that I've looked into, like they can also be like fairly effective dewormer for like goats and sheep specifically, because of the tannins and stuff in them. So I don't hate the trees, I just don't know how to. And of course, like any family farm, it's a family affair, and everyone has a different opinion of how to remanage it, which is I think part of why we've kind of stagnated. And so I was just kind of looking for because I would definitely prefer to go this route and try to put cattle, or well, probably goats and sheep first and then follow. But the fence has me the most concerned.
Right. And I mean, yeah, I've seen, you got to get them out early in the spring, but I've seen sheep working over blackberry canes, eating the buds off in the spring. I've seen them eating on gooseberries and multiflora rose, and I was actually very pleasantly surprised to see my sheep working over those multiflora roses. Now, if it's a giant bush, I mean, they can't, obviously, they're not going to jump up on top of it. The goats might do more of that, but a lot of what I did last fall, was I actually we had this little Kubota with a 4-foot brush mower and just went from rose bush to rose bush and just clipped them back. I didn't treat them or anything like that. I just mowed them down so they were more manageable.
Katie, I've had quite a bit of experience with that, and our main tools are, to begin with, a chainsaw and a skid steer with a grapple on the front of it to pick up everything that you cut. But those big trees, the thorny trees, the undesirables, you can really just girdle them really easily with a chainsaw, slant that cut down through the cadmium layer at about 45 degrees and get a herbicide that will kill into that slot. And then as they fall over, you can pick them up and get them burned. And remember also that if you use temporary fencing, if it's possible to get it through there, you can have a group of cows that will trample and create a pasture for you. They'll trample blackberries and a lot of things. I don't want you to starve them out until they're eating the bark off the trees, but you can have enough density in there, enough pounds per acre, that by really sectioning off small areas where your trample becomes let the cows work for you. The trample that they do will create a better pasture.
Thank you both for your answers. I appreciate that.
Now, a permaculturist will tell you to put a bunch of pigs in there and they'll root all that stuff up. But I think that you're going to be unhappy with the end result. It's going to be a little rough. But that's what the permaculturist would tell you to do.
You know, the goat business is thriving because a lot of these solar farms and so forth are fenced, and the goat owners are in the business of pasturing that grass under the solar, but they're fairly expensive to hire. We've had some properties here around the Combe that our land trust owns that we've tried some goats in, and they come in, put up a temporary fence, and then let the goats work, and they can get up on their hind feet, so they get up maybe 6 or 7 feet, 8 feet maybe, and do a pretty decent job. It's fairly expensive. It's actually more expensive than mechanical means. Just there's a lot of equipment too out there right now. If you watch your IDOT roads, they're using some interesting equipment to take down brush, and you can hire people that own those things, and it's not too expensive. Just do what you can afford at a time and keep working at it until you get on top of it.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining us for discussion. I don't see any more questions or comments in the chat unless anybody has anything else. I think we can wrap things up. Thank you for joining us today. We will post the webinar recording to our YouTube playlist soon, which you can find by visiting our website. Our next session, which will be the final part in our 6-part series, will be Tuesday, April 11th, to discuss value chain development. You can see our website for some details and to register. So thank you all for joining us today. Thought it was a really good discussion. So thank you.
Thank you.